Hello and welcome. We are well into our card match app, and as you can see, in this lesson we'll be working on the actual collection view cell. By the end of this lesson, you'll have the images displaying in the cell, and you'll be able to tap on the cells to flip them. It might seem simple, but we actually have a lot to cover, so let's get started. Alright, so we're back in Xcode, and just to remind you guys, the last thing that we did was we set up the delegate and the data source for the collection view so that we can show all of these cells. Now all of these cells are the same thing. It's basically just showing a static image of the card back. What we actually need to do is we need to set the card front for each of these cells. Right, and let me remind you, in the storyboard here, for this prototype cell that we have, you can see the card back here, we actually had two image views inside of it. One of them is the back image view, which is what you see here. And then we also have the front image view, which is not set to an image yet. Actually, this particular one is set to card 1, but you can't see it because it's behind the back of the card. So let me also remind you that this prototype cell that we gave this identifier called card cell, we made this an instance of card collection view cell, which is a custom class that we created over here. And this is a subclass of the standard UICollectionView cell. The reason why we subclassed it and created our own customized collection view cell is because we want to add additional functionality to it. Now, as you can see, we've already established two IB outlet properties connecting those UI image views, the front and the back. And we're going to have some methods here that we're going to use to manipulate which one gets shown. So there are a couple of things that we need to set in this card collection view cell. For example, we need to have another property that is going to keep track of which card this cell is supposed to display. So I'm just going to call this property card, and I'm going to make it an optional because initially it's going to be nil. Nothing is going to be set to it. And we're going to create another method in here called setCard, and it would pass in a card into that method like that. And actually, let us put an underscore there so that when this method gets called, we won't have to specify that label there. And another method we're going to have is flip, and this method is going to flip from the back image view to the front image view so that whatever card is being displayed in here is going to be visible. Furthermore, we're going to have another one called flip back, and this is going to flip from the front to the back image view. Alright, so let's implement the set card first. So the card that gets passed into this cell is the one that we want this cell to represent and to display. So we're going to keep track of it first by assigning this parameter that gets passed in to the property. And since they're both named card, we are going to need to differentiate between the two. In order to do that, we can use the self keyword to refer to this property right here. Self refers to the card collection view cell dot card. This references this property right here. So we're going to set the parameter that gets passed in to the card property of the card collection view cell. Keep track of the card that gets passed in. So the next thing we're going to want to do is to set this front image view to the card image. Now this card that gets passed in is a part of the card class. The card class has an image name property that is going to contain the image asset name. So we can set that. We can set the image view to that. So we're going to do front image view dot image is equal to, and this property, let me show you again, this property takes in a UI image object. So we have to create a UI image object. And when we are creating this UI image object, there actually is a initializer method that we can use where we can pass in a string of the image file that we want to use. So that's perfect because we can just pass in card.imageName. And sometimes this method that we use to create this UI image object may result in a nil if this image name doesn't exist. And so in that case, the front image view wouldn't be displaying an image. So if you flip a card and you don't see the image, you should just double check what the image name is and see if it matches the asset names in your asset library. You can see that we have lowercase c, a, r, d, followed by a number from 1 to 13. So the next thing we have to do is to actually call this setCard method on each of the cells. If we jump into the storyboard, let me remind you that this prototype cell is a type of card collection view cell. Right? I've mentioned that a couple of times already. Well, that's going to be to our benefit if we scroll down here in our view controller. When the collection view asks the view controller for a cell to display a particular item in the grid, we're using this DQ reusable cell method to return a cell with the identifier card cell. Well, I just showed you in the storyboard that we set that prototype cell to be a type of card collection view cell. So when this method gets this cell back with the card cell identifier, it's actually a type of card collection view cell. All we need to do in this case is cast it as a card collection view cell, because that's what it is. Now, the reason why we have to do this cast is because DQ reusable cell doesn't know anything about any of the custom classes that we create in this project. This is a method in the UICollectionView class inside UIKit. So we have to tell it that the cell that you got back with this identifier is actually a type of card collection view cell. So we can use the as keyword to indicate that. And this exclamation mark is just to indicate that it for sure, we're very confident that it's going to be a card collection view cell, because the other thing that you can put here instead of an exclamation mark is a question mark. And when you do that, it's kind of like you're trying to cast that object as a card collection view cell. If it turns out that it's not that type, it will actually just, the whole thing will be nil and it's going to get assigned to cell right here. But because we are very confident that it is going to be that type and the cast will be successful, we are going to use an exclamation mark like that. Okay, so now take a look at this. Cell here is a type of card collection view cell because we cast it as a card collection view cell right here. That means that we can access that method that we just created called setCard. And then we can pass in the card. Well, how are we going to get the card? Well, we do have the card array, right? That contains all of the card objects. We just need to know which card in that array to assign to the cell. Well, remember I said this index path parameter tells us which cell the collection view is asking to display. That's how we're going to get that card. So here we're going to say let card equal to card array. Right, the array works on a set of indexes, and we are going to pass in index path dot row. Remember I said there was a row property in the index path that indicates which item it's trying to display. Well, we're going to grab that card. So if it's trying to display the very first card, row is going to be 0, and that's perfect because card array 0 is the first index of the array. And so we're going to assign that to card, and then we're simply going to pass card into the setCard method of the card collection view cell. And that is going to, if we jump to that, that is going to set the front image view.image to that card's image. So hopefully that's still making sense. Let me just write some comments here so that we're clear. Try, or not try, but get a card cell, or get a card collection view cell object. Get the card that the collection view is trying to display and set that card for the cell. Now, if I run it, you're still going to see only the card backs, even though we have set the front image view. And the reason for that is because the front image view is hiding behind the back image view. We now need to implement the flip method in the card collection view cell so that when we tap on the card, we can call that flip method and we can flip over the cards. All right, so let's do that. In the card collection view cell class, right here for flip, there's a very easy way to transition between two UI elements like we have here, front image view and back image view. And that is actually a type method of the UI view class called transition. So there are a couple of them. Be careful which one you use. We're going to use this one with the from parameter, to parameter. You can specify duration and some options and also what happens when they're completed. So you can see here in the description, creates a transition animation between the specified views using the given parameters. So let's choose that one. For this flip method, we're flipping from back to front. So in the from view, we are going to put the back image view, pressing tab to jump to the next parameter. The to view is the front image view. Duration is going to be specified in seconds, so I'll have 0.3 in here. And in the options, there are actually a couple of options we want to set. The first one is how that animation is going to appear, or what type of animation we want to use. There's a couple of predefined ones. I'm going to press dot, and that is going to allow me to choose transition flip from the left. Okay. We also want to specify another option in addition to how it looks. There is another option that dictates that the one that you transition from should be hidden. So let me show you how to specify multiple options. You basically have to pass in an array with the options. So let's put this particular option into an array by putting these square brackets on and then pressing comma like that to specify a second element in this array. I'm going to press dot again and dot transition show hide transition views. So hide or show views during a view transition. That means that the view that it transitions from is just going to be hidden instead of completely removed from the view hierarchy. Okay, and completion is we can specify a block of code here that we want to run when the animation is complete. We don't really have any need to do this, so I'm just going to put nil in here. All right, and that's basically it. Now in the flip back method, we are going to do the same thing, except it's going to be reversed. The from parameter is going to be the front view and the to parameter is going to be the back image view. But there's also something special that we have to do. For the flip back, we want to delay it a little bit so the user has a chance to see what card it is before we flip it back. So I'm not going to implement this method just yet. Instead, I want to go back to the view controller and handle the did select cell at or did select item at method so that we can actually start flipping cards over when you tap them. So let's jump back to the view controller, and in here, collection view did select item at. It also gives you the index path that was selected. That index path is going to be key because it tells us which cell was actually selected. So in order to call the flip method of a cell, we need to get a reference to the cell that was actually selected. And we're going to use the index path to get that. Luckily for us, the collection view actually has a method called cell for item, where you pass in an index path. That's something we have already, and you get back an optional UICollectionView cell. Now the reason it's optional is because it could be nil, and also take note that it returns a basic UICollectionView cell. We know that our cells are not just standard UICollectionView cells. In fact, our cells are our customized card collection view cells, right? So we need to cast the result of this method to card collection view cell. So let's do this first. Index path, we're just going to pass in the index path. and we need to assign this to something. So again, let's create a constant called cell. Let cell equals that, and we again are going to use the as keyword to cast the result, cast the cell that it gets back as a card collection view cell. All right, so now we can flip the cell or flip the card, and we can call cell.flip. Let's take a look at that to see if it's going to work. There we go. Now nothing happens. We haven't really implemented the code to do matches and kind of take it away. And we also didn't implement any code to only have unique pairs. So that's why you see some of these, the pairs are the same. All right, so at this point, you should be able to flip all of them and see when I click them again, or when I tap on them again, we get the same transition. The reason is because whenever the user taps on a cell or selects a cell, we just call flip, and it always just flips from back to front. So instead, what we have to do is determine if the card has been flipped already. And I don't know if you remember, but in the card class, we have this property called isFlipped, which is true or false, and that is going to determine whether we should call the flip or the flip back methods of the card collection view cell. So why don't we first get a reference to the card that the user selected. So we did this before in the other method, but we are going to access the card array because that contains all of our cards, and the index that we need is indicated inside the index path.row. Okay, so that's going to give us the card that the user selected. Get the card that the user selected. Oops, here, get the cell that the user selected. So now that we have a reference to the card object, we can check and use an if statement. If the card is flipped is true, then we probably wouldn't want to call the flip. But if it is false, then we do want to flip it up like that. Actually, what we're going to check first is if it's not flipped. If it's not flipped, then we want to flip it up. And otherwise, if it is already flipped, why don't we flip it back for now? Even though we probably wouldn't actually do this as part of the game, but it's going to be fun to be able to flip the card front and back. So let's implement it. Let's go back to the card collection view cell. And you know how I said that when the card flips back, there would be a delay? We're going to implement that delay in a couple of lessons later when we actually have the logic of the game working. At this point, why don't we just simply flip it back so that you can test out your code to see if you can flip it from front to back. Okay, so we're going to flip from the front image view to the back image view. Duration is 0.3 again. And for the animation options, let's do flip from the right this time, comma, show hide transition views, and when it's completed, we also put in nil like that. Okay, so I'm going to run the project. So when we flip it, you should be able to tap it. And actually, this is interesting because I forgot to do one thing. You can see I can't flip it back. Right? The reason is because I forgot to set this property of the card. When we flip it up, we have to set isFlip to true so that we can remember if it was flipped up or not. So after we determine that it hasn't been flipped and we do flip it, we should probably set the card is flipped to true. Notice that we're using a single equal sign for assigning a new value, whereas when you're comparing, you use these two equal signs. Set the status of the card. And likewise, here when we flip it back, status of the card. Card.isFlipped is false. Okay, now we run it. Okay, there we go. Now, before we end the lesson, there's still one more thing we need to implement, and it has to do with the collection view reusing its cells. Now, I mentioned to you before that the collection view is very efficient because right now only about 8 cells are visible, right? So it's not going to display the bottom 2 rows, but as soon as I start scrolling like this, you see how that top row is scrolled out of view? Well, those 4 cells are actually going to be reused the next time it needs cells. So as I'm scrolling here and I'm revealing the bottom row, this 4th row, it is probably reusing cells from that very first row that are now completely out of view, right? So it reuses those cells. And what that means is, let me actually show you what the problem is. Let's say I reveal these 2 cards. So for these 2 cells, I have set it so that the front image view is visible and the back image view is invisible, right? However, when I scroll these cells out of view, these 2 in particular, it's going to attempt to use those cells to display the rows at the bottom, potentially. So it didn't happen this time, but let me scroll back up. And so it's going to display new cells. So you can see here that the cell it was using in this position before, now it has used that instead to display this cell, right? I didn't flip over this card. This cell before was over here, right? So that is part of the problem. What we need to do is just modify our set card method to reset everything. So it kind of erases the old state of the cell, because keeping in mind that it can be a reused cell and not a completely new one. And so what we need to do in this case is first determine if the card is in a flipped up state or flipped down state. And the way we're going to determine this is basically using, we probably don't have to use self. We're going to access this isFlipped property, right? So if isFlipped is true, then we probably want to be displaying the front image view. Else, we want to display the back image view. So this one is make sure the back image view is on top, and this one is make sure the front image view is on top. So we can use transition again. This one is from the back image view to the front image view. Duration, I'm going to put 0 because I want it to happen immediately. So this one will be transition flip from the left, and show hide transition views, and completion is nil. And I'm moving a little bit fast because we did this before in the flip and flip back methods. Now in this case, we want to make sure the back image view is on top. So we want to flip from the front image view to the back image view. Duration is 0. Options, open up an array, go dot, show hide transition views. It doesn't really matter what order you specify these options. We can flip from the left, duration is 0 anyways, specify nil. So now let's run the project again. Now what happens here is that when we call set card, it's going to make sure that even if it is a reused cell, it doesn't matter what state that cell was in, because we are going to determine whether we should put the back on top or the front image on top. So let's test that out. All right, and then I'm going to scroll down, I'm going to scroll up, I'm going to scroll down. So we are reusing cells right now. Each time these 2 cells get scrolled out of view, they're being reused for some cells down here. And when I scroll back up to reveal those cells, there are some cells at the bottom that are out of view now being reused for these cells up here. It looks like everything is good.
All right, so now we have the cards flipping. In this lesson, you learned how to do some animations. You also learned about closures, which are basically blocks of code like a function, except that it doesn't have a name associated with it like a function does.
You also learned how to delay the execution of code. Now, the next step is to add some logic to our app so that when the user flips open two cards, we can determine what's a match and what isn't. If you're enjoying this series so far, please let me know in the comment section below. And if you like this video, please hit that red subscribe button. And if you don't want to miss the next one, hit that bell icon as well. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next lesson.